Hi everyone, it's Katrina. The Electromagnetic Pyramid. Historical records tell us that when the Great Pyramid of Giza was first constructed 4,500 years ago, it had a capstone of pure gold. This has never been confirmed, but many scholars believe this as fact rather than speculation. The pyramid may have had a massive triangular capstone made of solid gold, but others have guessed there was a massive throne placed on a platform at the top of the pyramid, from which the pharaohs could look out over their empire. After all, the Great Pyramid of Giza was the tallest human structure on the planet, so the view from the top must have been amazing. It stood a whopping 481 feet tall for nearly 4,000 years, and it was only dethroned by St. Paul's Cathedral in 1221 AD. But what if there wasn't a golden capstone or a throne at the top of the pyramid? What if instead there was an electromagnetic sphere attached to the pyramid's tip that helped it function as a giant ancient energy plant? This theory was most recently put forth by architect Miguel Pérez Sánchez, who says the sphere may have symbolized the Eye of Horus. Some even think Nikola Tesla was trying to replicate what the ancient Egyptians did with his own inventions. Nikola Tesla was the kind of genius that only comes around once in a millennium. He's been credited with coming up with the idea of smartphones, Wi-Fi, the AC power supply system, and so much more. But what a lot of people don't realize is that Tesla believed energy came from the planet itself. In 1905, he filed a patent in the US called The Art of Transmitting Electrical Energy Through the Natural Medium. In this patent, Tesla had designs for a generator that would be used to tap into the ionosphere in order to collect energy. The generator was designed to be an almost exact mimic of the Giza Pyramid. It's even known today as Tesla's electromagnetic pyramid. Tesla likely believed the pyramid was a giant battery, and that at its peak was an electromagnetic sphere used to channel the Earth's energy. But if you ask any modern archaeologist, they'll likely tell you the pyramid is nothing but a huge tomb. What do you think about all this? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Inca Qamana. Almost nothing is known of the bizarre construction we call the Inca Qamana, or the rest of the Inca. All the information we have about this mysterious monument comes from ancient legends. It was said that on the way into the sacred city of Yunguyo, the Inca royalty would stop here at the Inca Qamana to rest at what looks like a giant stone staircase. Only then could they proceed to the Temple of the Sun in Titicaca to give worship to the gods. The Inca Qamana is a massive staircase made of solid rock with seats, niches, and misshapen steps carved from a giant chunk of compressed ash. The material used to build the monument was likely quarried at the same site where Pumapunku and Tiwanaku got their stones. Some have suggested that the stone was quarried from the Kapia Hill site, after which it was used to build several Inca ceremonial structures. Even today, people use the Inca Qamana when they need to sit, take a rest, and re-energize. Something about sitting on these cold stones seems to renew a person's energy, suggesting that the site could be imbued with some type of magical properties. In fact, there are a lot of things that still happen at the Inca Qamana these days. The local Aymaras still consider the site to be sacred and use it as the location for their annual New Year celebration. It's likely that the Inca used it for their ceremonies as well, though some experts have suggested it was nothing but a simple auditorium for outside entertainment. There we go again, ruining everyone's fun. I want to say big thank you to Jared Quinney at Amar0707. Thanks so much for watching and supporting Origins Explained. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe and join the family. Ggantija. Ggantija is one of the most mysterious megalithic temple complexes in the world. It can be found on the Ziggurat Plateau, which itself is on the island of Gozo in Malta. Amazingly, evidence of human habitation here dates back 7,000 years. Early Neolithic people got in their primitive boats and paddled out to the island around 5000 BC. Nobody knows exactly what they did out there on the island, but they were joined later by more waves of settlers. And by about 4000 BC, they were building massive complexes. Ggantija is one of the most impressive structures that's still standing. It consists of a pair of stone temples and a third temple that was never finished for some reason. Locals call it the Giant's Tower, and archaeologists believe the temples were constructed over a period of nearly 1,000 years. The first was built in 3600 BC, and the last one was left incomplete around 2900 BC. This might not seem all that old, but compared to some more recent sites, it really is ancient. These dates make Ggantija the second oldest existing man-made religious structure in the world, and it's one of the first freestanding stone buildings ever made. What a lot of people don't realize is that Malta is one of the oldest places on the planet. There are many other megalithic sites in the Republic of Malta, many of which are stone temples scientists have never been able to explain. Nobody knows why, but the Neolithic humans who lived here took to building complex religious sanctuaries long before the ancient Egyptians even existed. Just like other seemingly cultic buildings in Malta, Ggantjija's temples align with the celestial cycles. Their entrances are lit up brilliantly during the sunrise on either equinox. There was also a lot of worshipping happening inside the temples. Worship included animal sacrifice, but it's unclear who exactly was being worshipped. Some experts suggest a fertility goddess, but there are no real clues to say who the gods, god, or goddess of these ancient people were. As if all of this wasn't mysterious enough, there is one more thing to understand about Ggantija. It was built by a group known as the Maltese Temple Culture. They vanished from the island about halfway through the 3rd millennium BC, explaining why they never finished the third temple. Scientists don't know why they left, only that they disappeared as if they never existed at all. The broken menhir. The mystery of the broken menhir of Er-Grah is going to blow your mind. It's one of the least known wonders of the ancient world, but surprisingly, it's also the most important. It was the biggest megalith ever constructed in human history. This giant stone monument was raised in France around 4700 BC, a whopping 6,700 years ago. This was long before the world's first cities in Mesopotamia, and before the first civilized societies began to take shape. It was so long ago that the existence of the Er-Grah menhir makes no sense. It stood for about 700 years, then for unknown reasons it fell over and shattered. It broke into 4 main pieces, and to this day, they are still lying on the ground in rural France. The megalith weighed an impressive 280 tons. Even with all our modern technology, machines would have a difficult time moving something so heavy across the landscape. It could be done, but it would take a lot of machinery and a lot of skilled people who knew what they were doing. Yet somehow, prehistoric people carved, shaped, transported, and constructed the 280-ton monument when they hadn't even figured out how to build a wheel yet. The fact that this happened, which it definitely did, makes it the most remarkable engineering feat ever. For a while, scientists weren't even sure the monument ever stood upright. There was speculation that it just couldn't be done. But more recently, archaeologists have proved that it did stand, and it did topple and break. The monument stood 68 feet high. It was so tall that it would have dominated the landscape, and people would have been able to see it from miles away. Its surface was also covered in detailed petroglyphs. The same people who shaped the stone covered it in mysterious symbols and pictures, all of which have been destroyed by years out in the open. The Lea Fail. One of the most sacred sites in all of Ireland is the Hill of Tara in County Meath. The hill looks like any other green hill in the vast Irish countryside, but in reality, it's far from ordinary. The Hill of Tara, or the King's Seat, was once the place where the High Kings of Ireland ruled over their subjects. Long before Dublin existed, the Hill of Tara was the capital of Ireland. This was a very long time ago, with the earliest evidence of construction here dating back to 3200 BC. The hill was used by the High Kings so long ago that nothing remains today except a handful of monuments, some creepy burial chambers, and piles of rubble. But one thing that does remain is the Lea Fail, or the so-called Stone of Destiny. It's an extremely strange pillar of rock at the very top of the hill that was supposedly brought to Ireland by the Tuatha De Danann. If you're not familiar with Irish mythology, here's a quick recap on the Tuatha De Danann, Ireland's mythical race. The Tuatha De Danann are often depicted in Irish mythology as kings and queens, as well as heroes, brave travelers, fierce warriors, and wise druids. The one thing they have in common is that they all possess incredible supernatural powers. They also live in the other world, a kind of mirror realm where mortals dare not tread. You can almost think of them as the Aesir gods from Norse mythology, like Thor, Odin, and Loki. But now let's get back to the Lea Fail, the magic stone that's still standing at the hill of Tara. Legend has it that the stone was brought from the city of Phaleas, one of the 4 magical cities that were located in the Northern Isles. When the Tuatha De Danann first arrived in Ireland, they came with the stone, a magical spear, and a magic sword, as well as a cauldron capable of feeding an entire army. These were extremely sacred relics, and the only one we know that really exists is the Lea Fail. But there are those that are skeptical regarding the stone's magical properties. Not everyone believes the proudly standing pillar is the original Stone of Destiny. Locals say the one there today was only put up in the 1820s by locals in commemoration of someone who died in an 18th century rebellion. There are also records from earlier in the 18th century that say the stone had been lying on its side for generations before someone turned it upright. The Laladoff Plate. An archaeological expedition in 1937 turned up 716 granite discs in the Bayanhar Mountains of northwest China. These discs became known as the Dropa stones, and one of them is called the Laladoff Plate. Most mainstream archaeologists agree that they are fakes, but not everyone is convinced. Many believe these mysterious granite discs tell the tale of an intergalactic meeting that happened on Earth 12,000 years ago. The discs are covered in hieroglyphics, showing images of everything from star maps to alien mummies with elongated skulls. Interpretations of these stones and plates suggest that primitive humans witnessed an extraterrestrial crash landing. But in reality, it's hard to know the exact truth about the stones. French ufologist Jacques Vallée says the Dropa stones are nothing but a hoax. However, the Academy of Prehistory in Beijing supposedly took them very seriously. Chinese archaeologists translated the markings on the discs and delivered a hypothesis. They claimed the markings were made by the extraterrestrials themselves in the days, weeks, and years after their crash landing on Earth. The conclusions were even published in an academic journal by archaeologist Sum Nui, and not surprisingly, the publication received extreme ridicule. Sum Nui was treated so poorly after he published his results that he was exiled from the country. Then, shortly after, he died in Japan. The mysterious discs do show aliens interacting with humans, but no one has ever been able to say definitively whether they were fake or if they were really produced by alien technology. In 1966, some of the discs were allegedly shipped to Moscow to be studied by Soviet scientists. And in 1974, Austrian engineer Ernst Wegerer got a hold of 2 discs in China and photographed them. But by 1994, the discs were all completely gone, and nobody has seen one since. What do you think happened to the Dropa stones? Let us know in the comments below. And while you're at it, be sure to subscribe. The shark teeth mystery. Scientists discovered a small collection of fossilized shark teeth in a very unusual place. They were found in an archaeological site that's 2,900 years old, located in Jerusalem's City of David. The cache of shark teeth was found roughly 50 miles from where scientists would expect to find such fossils. The teeth are about 80 million years old and should have been closer to an ancient ocean. And for this reason, scientists think they may have been part of a collection from the days of the biblical King Solomon. Researcher Dr. Thomas Tutkin from the University of Mainz says the fossils weren't in their original setting, which means they must have been moved. Dr. Thomas believes the shark teeth were very important to someone in this biblical city, but he's not sure why. In fact, Thomas isn't sure why similar collections of fossils have been found in other parts of Israel as well. But let's get back to the actual discovery. The teeth were found buried underneath the foundation of an Iron Age house. Someone mixed the teeth with the material used to fill the foundation at the bottom of the house in the city of David. They were mixed with other materials like fish bones and food waste, as well as scraps of letters and packages. It appears as though they came from the garbage of someone very important. And in ancient days, trash was often used as a construction material. Dr. Tutkin thinks the ancient shark teeth may have been part of a government official's personal fossil collection. The teeth then got thrown away with a bunch of their papers and food scraps, then wound up in a landfill where they were used to fill in the foundation of a new house. It's not 100% confirmed, but this is the best theory we have right now for the origins of the mysterious shark teeth, the tomb of Senenmut. American archaeologist Herbert Windlock was behind the discovery of Senenmut's tomb between 1925 and 1927. The tomb is officially called TT353, and it's located near Deir el-Bahari and the Temple of Hatshepsut. According to legend, Senenmut was the one who designed and constructed the mighty temple, which continues to be one of the most impressive in all of Egypt today. And although his burial chambers may not have held the greatest relics ever found, he did have an impressive ceiling. His tomb was very well decorated, showing that he wasn't just a friend of Queen Hatshepsut, a government official and an architect. He was also a brilliant astronomer. Senenmut and Hatshepsut lived in the 18th dynasty. Senenmut was buried in his tomb around 1473 BC. Like any other government official during the days of Queen Hatshepsut, he was given a generous burial with a vast tomb. What makes his tomb so unique and exciting is that the walls and ceiling are covered in celestial diagrams. Panels representing the constellations, lunar cycles, and images of deities can be found strewn along the interior of the tomb. But there is one very crucial thing missing from all the paintings of the cosmos in Senenmut's tomb. It's such an important missing piece that it's baffled scientists ever since they started interpreting the images. On the southern ceiling of the tomb is a painted map of the sky showing distant planets like Mercury, Venus, Jupiter, and Saturn. However, nowhere in his tomb can the planet Mars be found, the heavenly body closest to Earth. For some reason or another, it's just not there at all, as if the great astronomer had somehow forgotten about the third rock from the sun, the Aztec crystal skulls. There are fake Aztec crystal skulls on display in museums across the globe, and all of them can likely be traced back to a single man. But are the crystal skulls really all fakes? Is there not at least one ancient crystal skull that scientists can't explain? Well, let's get into it. The crystal skulls have been on display in museums for decades. Some of them are tiny, no bigger than a small amulet, while others are the size of a bowling ball. But in the 1990s, anthropologist Jane Walsh from the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History began to grow suspicious of the skull's authenticity. Her suspicions were triggered after the Smithsonian received an Aztec crystal skull from an anonymous donor. The donor claimed the skull once belonged to a Mexican dictator, but was originally made by the Aztec hundreds of years ago. Jane Walsh was quick to dismiss the skull as a fake, saying its proportions weren't right and that it obviously wasn't a real human skull. Then Jane started investigating the other skulls found in museums across the world. One of these skulls was right there in the Smithsonian Institution's collection. It appeared in the 1800s, supposedly delivered from a museum in Mexico. A catalog card from the 1950s said the object was a total fake and that it was created using modern jewelry tools and techniques. The investigators in the 1950s even left behind the name of the potential suspect responsible for the phony skull, Eugene Boben. As Jane continued her investigation, she found more and more fake crystal skulls, even one in the extremely prestigious British Museum that came from Eugene Boban in the late 19th century. As it turns out, Eugene Boban was a genius. He tricked museums from here to Timbuktu into taking his fake Aztec skulls. He even created an entire mythology around these objects. But because he died a long time ago, we'll never know how he did it or why. And all these years later, people still believe in the mystical power of the crystal skulls. The Shugborough inscription. The Shugborough inscription has been torturing scientists and linguistic experts for years. On the grounds of Shugborough Hall in England, there stands something called the Shepherd's Monument. The monument itself isn't that old and was only created in the 18th century. On its face is a carving of artist Nicolas Poussin's famous Arcadian shepherds, and underneath the engraving is a series of letters. The letters OUOSVAVV are etched onto the monument without any indication of what they might mean. On the left and slightly below the engraving is the letter D, and on the other side is the letter M. The D and the M seem to frame the main inscription, but offer no clues to explain its meaning. It's been a long time since experts realized the inscription might be some kind of code, but nobody has ever been able to crack it. The smartest ciphers in the world were driven to madness and forced to give up on trying to break the uncrackable code. Even famous geniuses like Charles Dickens and Charles Darwin briefly attempted to understand the Shugborough inscription, but found it didn't make any sense and ultimately gave up. One of the most interesting theories is that the inscription doesn't mean anything at all. Many believe the 7 mystery letters were put there to provide an unsolvable mystery. It could also be that the letters were meant to be a hint as to the whereabouts of the Holy Grail. One legend says it was the Knights Templar who made the inscription, or at least one of their descendants, seeing as they were already dead 500 years before the inscription was made. It could be that some distant surviving Templar placed a final clue as to the location of the legendary Holy Grail. Giant footprints. There are countless legends around the world of giants. These behemoths can be found in the mythologies of Greece, Scandinavia, Germany, India, Mexico, Peru, so pretty much everywhere there are stories about giants. The Maya told tales of giant humans, and giants are even mentioned in the Bible. The Vikings also believed in the existence of titanic men and women. But how much proof do we have that giants walked among us? The truth is, there isn't much. We have myths and legends, but real physical evidence is scarce. And that brings us to the giant footprints that have been found across the globe. There's allegedly a giant footprint like the fossil of some prehistoric animal embedded in a rock in Russia. And there's another one in South Africa near the border of Swaziland. A third can be found near Bangalore, sideways in a rock, as if a huge giant ninja kicked his massive footprint into the stone. The biggest issue with all these random footprints that were supposedly left behind by giants is that nobody has ever verified them as real. The footprints haven't been cataloged by accredited scientific journals, and archaeologists don't talk about them. And even most mainstream scientists believe they are a hoax. One of the most recent stories comes to us from a Chinese village. Photographers exploring a remote area supposedly came across a footprint that was left behind by a giant. They took pictures of their own feet in the footprint, and theirs hardly filled a third of the space. It's clearly a footprint in the rock, but there is only one, not two like you'd expect to find. There isn't a trail leading to or away from the print, and nobody knows how old it is. A similar footprint was found in South Africa, in the Mpumalanga province. It was measured at nearly 4 feet long and is perfectly preserved in a chunk of granite. Locals call it the footprint of God and treat it as a holy place. African shamans say the footprint was left behind by a giant fleeing across a layer of warm lava after a volcanic eruption. These footprints do seem to exist all over the globe, but other than the local legends attached to them, nobody seems to have an answer for how they got there. And now for number 9. But first, it's shout-out time. I want to give a big thank you to Chadro Doni and Raul Stevens for supporting this channel. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to join the Origins Explained family. We'd love to have you, and we have lots more videos coming up. the temples of the sun god. A short 20-minute drive from the Great Pyramid of Giza will take you to the remains of another Egyptian monument, one that you won't find swarmed by eager tourists. It's the ruins of Abu Gorab, an ancient complex of sun temples where devotees of the god Ra once gathered to give praise to their sun deity. It's part of the later complex of Abu Sir, constructed in the 5th dynasty of the Old Kingdom, around 2400 BC. According to legend, Abu Gorab was once home to 6 solar temples. These were great and majestic temples used for a variety of purposes. Some historians think the solar temples were occupied by astronomers carrying out meticulous observations of the cosmos. This train of thought turns the solar temples into a kind of weather station, where astronomers kept track of the hours, days, and important celestial events. Others believe the solar temples were part of a singular cultic site, a place that saw rituals and ceremonies unfold, but nobody knows the exact truth. And to this day, only 2 out of the 6 temples have been found, Userkaf and Nayusera. Abu Gorab was also home to a massive obelisk. Excavations in the courtyard reveal the ruined foundations of a monumental stone tower with 4 sloping sides. It was about 60 feet high and was crafted from red granite and limestone. Some experts have theorized the obelisk was meant to be a monument to Ra's resting place, kind of like his gravestone. That would explain why there were so many temples in his honor at this mysterious place. Everything about Abu Gorab is strange and mysterious. There is a giant stone pedestal that some have called a stargate, although there's little proof of that. There are also giant alabaster dishes scattered throughout the site that contain bizarre designs on their surface. Some experts have suggested these were ritual bowls filled with animal blood, but again, it's never been confirmed. Many of these structures at Abu Gorab are even complete with drill holes, perfectly smooth boreholes in hard granite that look as though they were created by machines. This was clearly a place of great importance, but all we see today are endless riddles. Buried secrets. Archaeologists recently discovered a sunken Roman room at the Leicester Cathedral in the UK. The chamber, sunk beneath the ground, dates back to 200 AD. It's been a wildly exciting discovery because it seems to confirm an old folktale. Long before the cathedral was created, locals told tales of how the grounds were used in dark rituals, such as blood sacrifice and demon worship. The rumors were always dismissed as ancient nonsense. But with the discovery of the sunken chamber beneath the church, scientists are starting to wonder if there really was evil cult activity here 1,800 years ago. The chamber isn't particularly large. It's only about 13 feet by 13 feet, hidden about 10 feet beneath the surface. Archaeologists say it was an expertly crafted subterranean structure with a hard concrete floor and painted walls. And here's where things get exceptionally creepy. Inside the room was nothing except the base of a sandstone altar lying in a pile of rubble. This was an altar like you'd expect to find in some dark underground dungeon, where cultists were worshipping Cthulhu or some other malicious entity. In a press release, Matthew Morris, who led the excavation, said the room could be linked to the worship of one or more gods. But the whole thing is still a major mystery. Matthew went on to say that the subterranean room was likely a private place of worship. This means it could have been a family shrine or a cult room for a small group worshipping the same dark deity. Then again, the deity might not have been wicked. Plenty of underground chambers like this were used by followers of fertility cults and mystery cults. Those who worshipped Dionysus, Cybele, or Mithras all used similar underground chambers. And since there is no inscription on the altar, it's impossible to tell who the primary god was. The Runamo runes. Every now and then, an archaeologist will get a little too wrapped up in their work and make a mistake. It happens, which isn't surprising given that archaeologists are people too. The case of the Runamo runes is an excellent example of when an expert gets swept up in their own fantasy. The story of the Runamo runes takes us to a cliff face in Blekinge, which is located in southern Sweden. It was here where scholar Saxo Grammaticus first noted an unusual runic inscription in the 12th century AD, which he wrote about in his book, the Gesta Danorum. He thought the runes were illegible and that nobody was able to make out any of the words. Still, he attributed the runes to King Harald Wartooth of Denmark. King Harald's father had waged war to unite the forces of Sweden and Denmark in the 7th century AD, and Grammaticus believed the inscription was a memorial to that event. The issue was that the scholar couldn't read the runes and had no real evidence to back up his claim. In the 17th century AD, the rock was inspected again by a Danish antiquarian named Ole Worm. He too thought the runes were illegible, and other expeditions in the 18th century came to the exact same conclusion. The markings on the cliff face did look like runes, but none of the professionals could make sense of what was written. And now we arrive in modern times. The Danish Academy of Sciences sent a commission to figure out what was going on in 1833. The runes were then transferred to copper plates and given to Icelandic archaeologist Finn Magnusson to investigate. After a lot of analysis, Magnusson published his own translation of the runes. He believed they spelled out an ode to King Hildetand and the Battle of Bravalla, which is said to have taken place in 770 AD. But since then, this theory has been proven to be wrong. Magnusson was a respected academic who was brutally shamed when scientists finally concluded the runes were nothing but cracks in the rock. It was totally natural, just a bunch of splits in the stone that looked like runic symbols. Scientists couldn't solve the mystery because there was no mystery at all. Magnusson simply made up his translation, and it had no basis in reality. They weren't letters, they were cracks. The ancient atomic bomb. The Mahabharata is one of the most important ancient texts in all of India. It's a huge book filled with 100,000 verses that are divided into 18 parts, each one big enough to be its own individual book. It's about 10 times larger than Homer's Odyssey and the Iliad combined. The Mahabharata is so big and complicated, scholars have been trying to understand it for over 2,000 years. It's believed most of the book was written in the 3rd century BC, with the most recent parts likely added somewhere around the 4th century AD. The stories in the Mahabharata are philosophical, religious, and downright fanciful. It's been called the longest epic poem ever written. Some might even think of it as the Hindu version of the Bible or the Quran. Historian Kesari Mohan Ganguly believes the Mahabharata contains descriptions of nuclear holocausts that happened thousands of years ago. To understand, we have to look at one particular block of text. The text describes a flying Vimana hurling a projectile charged with the power of the universe. A Vimana was an ancient flying machine described in various Hindu texts, which obviously includes the Mahabharata. It was supposedly a floating city or palace, an ancient vehicle-like device used by the gods to travel from place to place. In this block of text, the Vimana launches a projectile with the power of the universe. What follows is a radiant column of smoke and fire, a flame brighter than 10,000 suns, that reduced entire races to ash. And if you really think about it, this description sounds an awful lot like a nuclear blast. The idea here is that the Mahabharata is telling a story about someone launching a nuclear missile from an aircraft. The thing nobody can explain is how the author of the book had any inkling as to what a nuclear weapon was 2,400 years ago. What do you think? Was it a nuclear war that occurred sometime in the ancient past? Or what other explanation could there be? Let me know in the comments below. And while you're at it, hit that subscribe button. The Astronaut of Casar. There is an artifact on display at the Cáceres Museum in Spain that scientists can't seem to get a grip on. The artifact in question is an upright slab of stone called a stele. It was discovered at the edge of a cemetery in the Spanish village of Casar. The stele is complete with a carving of what looks to be a human figure. The issue is that the figure doesn't appear to be completely human and looks like either an alien or a monster. It has a fishbowl-shaped head, big shoulders, and at the right angle, looks like it's wearing a spacesuit. Some say the stele offers proof of an ancient astronaut who visited Spain. Others say it's just a human figure who's been eroded by time and harsh weather. The figure is called the Astronaut of Casar. Along with the mysterious figure is an inscription written in Latin that's never been deciphered. The stele is so badly weathered that not even the best linguistic experts have been able to make sense of the letters. Because of the ambiguity surrounding the inscription, conspiracy theorists have been able to come up with their own explanations. It's technically impossible to say the figure isn't an alien, which means it's doubly impossible to say the inscription wasn't written in alien code. But what do we know for sure about the stele? For starters, it was likely made around the 1st century BC, and it remained at the edge of this cemetery for centuries. Before it was placed in the museum, local kids used to throw rocks at it. Villagers would also make the sign of the cross on their chest, and then whisper a small prayer every time they walked by the stele because they thought it was evil. The best guess archaeologists have, outside of the figure being an alien, is that it represents a Celtiberian warrior. There are also those who say the inscription might be written in the ancient Basque language of the Iberian Peninsula. But to date, the stele has never been translated, so who's to say what's really written on the ancient slab of stone? Falcon Shrine. A group of archaeologists investigating the ancient Egyptian port city of Berenike found an unexplainable shrine. They discovered proof of previously unknown ancient rituals that would give even the most strong-minded individuals the creeps. It all has to do with a bunch of headless falcons in the eastern Egyptian desert. According to the study, which was recently published in the American Journal of Archaeology, excavators were digging through a religious complex from the late Roman period. This was after the death of Cleopatra, in the early centuries AD when Rome ruled Egypt. Scientists from the Polish Center of Mediterranean Archaeology have since named the complex the Falcon Shrine. It was built as a traditional Egyptian temple, but after the 4th century AD, it was adapted to the belief system of the Blemmyes. The Blemmyes were a little-known people who appeared in the eastern desert in the 7th century BC. Nobody knows much about their history or where they came from, but by the 4th century AD, they had migrated into Lower Nubia and established their own obscure kingdom. And although their small kingdom may not have played a huge role in their history, their people never faded out of existence. The modern Beha people of eastern Sudan and northwestern Eritrea are the direct descendants of the Blemmyes. Inside the Falcon Shrine, archaeologists found the remains of 15 falcons. Most of the falcons had been beheaded, and many of them were buried with eggs. They were mummified too, suggesting they had been placed in the temple as religious offerings. The Blemmyes appear to have established a falcon cult in Berenike, but what exactly the cult did is anyone's guess. The shrine did contain one rather strange inscription that reads, "It is improper to boil a head in here." Researchers think that for such a sign to exist, there must have been a lot of head boiling going on. England's chalk horse. Near the village of Uffington in Oxfordshire, hidden in the English countryside, is a giant chalk horse that's etched into the grassland. It's located at the top of a grassy mound, and the horse dominates the flank of the hill. You can see it perfectly if you stand in the valley near the village and look up at the sprawling grassland. It's a humongous white horse that almost looks like the stick figure version of the animal. It's thin, simple, and has an unusually long tail, but nobody knows what it's doing there. Locals call it the Uffington White Horse, and as far as we know, it's the oldest figure that can be found among the English hills. The pictogram is the size of a football field, about 360 feet long, and can be seen from up to 20 miles away. It would have vanished by now if not for the annual tradition of Chalking Day. For 3,000 years, locals have continued the tradition of cleaning the horse and maintaining its perfectly white appearance. They use hammers, buckets of chalk, and everyone hobbles around on their hands and knees, whitening the horse. Antiquarian Francis Wise wrote about the tradition in 1736. He said the ceremony of scouring the horse came from time immemorial, originating sometime in the distant past. Modern historians think it's been going on ever since the horse was created, although nobody can pinpoint a date for that. Families come with knee pads, and parents chalk the horse with their kids just like their parents did with them when they were young. National Trust Ranger Andy Foley said that if people didn't look after the horse, it would have been overgrown within 20 years. It's truly amazing to think the horse has been cared for by so many people for so many years, and yet still nothing is known about its origins. Archaeologist David Miles excavated the horse in the 1990s to establish more information about it. He and his team learned that it was cut into the hill up to 3 feet deep. Somebody cut the horse's shape from the hillside, then filled it with chalk, and every year the horse is whitened to make it look brand new. But to this day, we have no idea why the horse was made and by who. So unfortunately, the mystery remains. The Piltdown Man. The Piltdown Man came into existence in February 1912. Hunting enthusiast and lawyer Charles Dawson reported the discovery of a fossilized human skull near Piltdown in Sussex, which is located in the United Kingdom. The first fragment of the skull was found a few years earlier by someone working in a gravel pit, but the discovery was solidified when Dawson found more pieces of the puzzle. Dawson and his colleagues excavated the gravel pit for months after, joined by the occasional foreign archaeologist interested in the discovery. They recovered a partial jaw, teeth, animal fossils, and primitive tools. In December 1912, Dawson presented his findings to the Geological Society. Using the fossilized pieces he uncovered, he and his team had reconstructed the skull of what he called the missing link. Dawson claimed he'd found the legendary missing animal between apes and humans, which he said lived 500,000 years ago. The creature became known as the Piltdown Man, but it was known scientifically as Eoanthropus dawsoni. The discovery was hot on the trail of another that had taken the anthropological community by storm. German scientist Otto Schuttensack had just discovered the Heidelberg Man in 1907. At the time, it was the oldest human fossil in the world, estimated to be between 400,000 and 600,000 years old. But then Dawson came around with his new discovery of the Piltdown Man in 1912. But Dawson's missing link turned out to be a fraud. However, he still enjoyed scientific prestige until November 21, 1953. That was when modern science finally proved the Piltdown Man was a carefully constructed fake. Dawson had orchestrated the whole thing just to make himself look good. And it worked because he died in 1916, never having to answer for his lies. To this day, scientists still haven't found the true missing link between primitive humans and apes, which begs the question, was there really a missing link to begin with? Hochelaga. In Canada, one of the most widespread and successful First Nations groups prior to the arrival of the Europeans was the Iroquois, and one of their most important villages was Hochelaga, which is recognized by the Canadian government as a National Historic Site. But in reality, the village doesn't currently exist. It has no physical remains, and it's unclear if it ever existed at all. It's believed the village is somewhere beneath the concrete of Montreal, specifically underneath the landmark known as Mount Royal. But nobody's ever found it, and archaeologists aren't about to dig up the whole city. Most of what we know comes from legend and from the stories passed down for the past few centuries. The village was supposedly a successful trading post inhabited by a powerful Iroquois federation. They were farmers and traders who ruled an area around the St. Lawrence River between 1200 AD and 1600 AD. The name of the village, Hochelaga, likely comes from the Iroquois word beaver path. And although there is no physical evidence that the village existed, we know there was a settlement on the island of Montreal when Europeans arrived in 1535. The first explorer to reach the village was Jacques Cartier from France. His first visit to the village was what drew other French explorers and settlers to the area in the following decades. Hochelaga is believed to be responsible for the city of Montreal, built from the village's Iroquois foundations. And here's a little-known fact for those who are interested. Canada is the Iroquois word for settlement. People still remember the history of Hochelaga these days. It's just that nobody knows what happened to it, or if it really is buried under Montreal. There was a plaque placed in a suburb in 1920 to honor Hochelaga, and a municipal park was named after the village as well, but not a single artifact from it has ever been recovered. Thanks for watching! What are your thoughts on these mysterious ancient enigmas? The Tenoumer crater. The Tenoumer crater in Mauritania isn't necessarily creepy, but it is extraordinarily unusual. It's one of the most excellent preserved craters on the planet, and it's hidden in the middle of the Sahara Desert. The crater is almost perfectly circular, looking like a cigar burn in the middle of the flat and empty wasteland that is the Sahara. But on the ground, things look much different than in satellite images. The crater is over 1 mile wide, with its rims rising a whopping 360 feet high. On the ground, it almost looks like the mouth of a forgotten volcano. The inside of the crater is filled with about 1,000 feet of sediment. It's like a giant bowl in the desert that sand has been blowing into for thousands of years. Scientists debated what caused the crater for a long time before finally settling on an answer. At first, they thought it was a volcano because of basalt-like rocks that were scattered around the edge of the crater. But in more recent years, closer examinations have revealed that the hardened lava was in fact rock that melted in the intense energy exchange during the meteorite impact. This was a place where a huge space rock hit the planet between 10,000 and 30,000 years ago. One thing scientists don't know is what happened when the meteorite smashed into this part of the Sahara Desert. Considering it was a giant space rock hitting the surface of the planet that annihilated the dinosaurs, it's safe to say there were some major consequences here. Such a huge impact event would have caused a cataclysm of unimaginable proportions. Given that the meteorite impact was upwards of 10,000 years ago, it fits perfectly with some legends of the ancient world, in particular the legend of Atlantis and the biblical tale of the flood. Many Christian scholars believe the flood that wiped the creepy giants known as the Nephilim off the face of the earth was about 10 or 12,000 years ago. This is the same timeline given for Atlantis being destroyed by a flood. There is a very good chance that when the Tenoumer crater was formed, the force of the impact caused a monumental tsunami, maybe even more than one, resulting in global devastation. However, keep in mind this is all speculation and hasn't been scientifically proven. I want to say a big thank you to Becky Vineyard for the super thanks and for supporting this channel. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe and join the family. We'd love to have you. Aliens in Algeria. Conspiracy theorists are going crazy over the alleged discovery of an ancient alien UFO found in the desert of Algeria. The supposed UFO was spotted thanks to Google Earth, with self-proclaimed experts calling the object H666. The user behind the discovery claims that there is an alien ship buried beneath the sands of the Sahara. His name is Scott C. Waring, and he is a self-proclaimed UFO hunter, but he isn't a real archaeologist. But a lot of people are taking him very seriously. According to what Scott said about his most recent find, there is a 5-pointed object on the edge of Algeria. It's not a metallic flying spaceship like you might be imagining, but a piece of land shaped like a pentagram or a starfish. Scott does have a point that the piece of land looks unusual compared to the desert surrounding it, but underneath the dirt, sand, and microorganisms, Scott thinks there is an ancient spaceship. He believes the ship has been buried over the past several thousand years, and that over time, land has accumulated over the ship, making it look kind of like a hill. As far as we know, nobody has gone out to physically explore the anomaly. Some have commented that there does appear to be moss growing around the object, which would suggest biological material. Some even wilder guesses are that the object is connected to underground passages, and that the aliens are still there, hiding beneath the desert. All of these claims are unfounded, but until someone goes out there with a shovel and starts digging, we just can't know for sure. For all we know, there could be preserved alien bodies mummified beneath the sand, hidden for the past 10,000 years. Tassili, Niger. To the casual observer, Tassili, Niger is an inhospitable stretch of desert with nothing of worth. It's dry, it's miserable, and you can get a sunburn in about 30 seconds flat. This harsh piece of the Sahara is in Algeria, right along the borders of Libya, Mali, and Niger. It covers an area of 28,000 square miles and is home to pretty much nothing but sandstone. But if you take a closer look, you'll see the ancient pieces of artwork etched into the miles of stone. A whopping 15,000 ancient cave drawings can be found in Tassili, Niger, and many of them are so baffling that scientists don't even know what to make of them. The cave paintings and rock art can be found throughout the entire region. Some are hidden deep in caves, while others are inside the crevices of crumbling stone mounds. Scientists first stumbled upon the works of art in 1910, and new ones are being discovered all the time. Some believe the pictures are nothing more than the creative expression of prehistoric desert tribes, but there are those who wholeheartedly believe the paintings reveal a secret history of alien visitors to planet Earth. Tassili, Niger is an official UNESCO World Heritage Site. Science tells us that the rock paintings, engravings, and doodles date as far back as 12,000 years. That would have been right around the time, either directly before or directly after, that the nearby Tenoumer crater was formed. UNESCO says the open-air museum tells the story of the people of the Sahara and that it can be divided into individual periods. The oldest period is known as the Wild Fauna period, which occurred between 10,000 and 6,000 BC. This was when the desert people were painting hippos, rhinos, elephants, and other massive beasts on the rocks in the Sahara, many of which are unidentifiable, and this all took place way before the Sahara was completely dry. Then there was the Roundhead period between 8,000 and 6,000 BC, which overlapped with the Wild Fauna period. This is the stretch of time that receives the most controversy. For about 2,000 years, the desert dwellers painted bizarre figures with circular heads and no features. These weren't animals, and they didn't exactly look like humans. Many researchers believe that these depictions were of some creepy unknown beings, humanoid monstrosities wearing what could be interpreted as gloves, helmets, and full-on spacesuits. Many have compared the drawings of these figures to primitive pictures of modern astronauts. There is no way of saying for sure that the people of the Sahara had contact with aliens and drew them on cave walls, but at the same time, there's no proof against it either. One of the weirdest and creepiest images by far is a drawing that you're going to have a hard time believing. The drawing appears to show several human women being dragged into what almost looks like a spaceship. These women are being herded like cattle into the craft, led by a towering figure wearing what looks like a fishbowl on his head. Take from that what you will, but you have to admit, very unusual. What do you think about all this? Let me know in the comments below. The Tashwinat mummy. In 1958, Professor Fabrizio Mori discovered one of the creepiest mummies ever. In a small and desolate cave in Wan Muhajjag, located in the Libyan desert, the professor came across the mummified remains of a small child. It was an astounding discovery, and one that continues to intrigue the scientific community. The child's remains are still on display all these years later at the Asaraya Alhambra Museum in Tripoli. The cave in which the youngster was found was occupied throughout prehistory. Its walls were decorated in ancient images of cattle, strange beasts, and people time has since forgotten. There was enough to see without digging around, but the professor wanted to find out what was hidden underneath the sand and dust of the cave's floor. So he began to dig through the cavern's soft bottom, and sure enough, he came across a bundle. The bundle was incredible and was the last thing the professor thought he'd find. Wrapped in goat skin was the carefully prepared mummy of the child, its entrails removed and replaced with wild plants. Scientists think the herbs used to stuff the child's remains were likely chosen to aid in preservation. Basically, they were chosen on purpose to make a mummy. After extensive investigations, we know the child was about 3 years old when they died. Radiocarbon dating proved the child lived about 5,400 years ago. That makes it older than the mummies from ancient Egypt, roughly 1,000 years older than the Pyramid of Khufu. It's amazing because the people who went through all the trouble of mummifying this child were likely little more than cattle herders. They were nomadic humans who roamed across North Africa back when the Sahara wasn't fully a desert yet. Somehow, simple nomadic herders had their very own recipe for mummification. They knew how to embalm, how to properly cover the flesh with antelope skin, and how to preserve the remains with the proper leaves. And it worked, with the primitive technique protecting the child for almost 6,000 years. the abandoned city of Jado. Deep in the Sahara Desert is a creepy abandoned ruin called Jado. It's in the country of Niger, way in the middle of nowhere. This is a place not many humans will see in their lifetime. Even the bravest of travelers don't typically find themselves in the central Sahara, never mind in the ghost city of Jado. The abandoned city is a true enigma. It's named after the Jado plateau that it sits on, but what researchers don't know is what its real name was. These structures aren't that familiar, meaning researchers haven't been able to identify the civilization that made this city based on its architecture. The ruins appear to be at least 1,000 years old, built when the Sahara received much more water and was very fertile. The city was once fortified with tall walls and strong towers. There were houses built all around the central part of the fortification, and there seemed to be an emphasis put on local defense. This may have been a city that attracted unwanted attention because of its wealth. Archaeologists have found tons of food storage buildings, meaning the people here were obviously well fed. As for construction materials, there isn't much in the desert. The empty city was built from palm tree trunks, mud, and sand. It was built so big, though, that even today, its ruins dominate the landscape. We know absolutely nothing about the city's origins, only that about 500 years ago, the Kanuri people of the Sahara found the ruins and moved in. It may have been their ancestors that built the city, but that wouldn't make much sense, considering they aren't known for any other monumental constructions. But 5 centuries ago, shortly after the Kanuri moved in, they left. The desert was simply too barren, and there was no food or water, so the city was left to become a dark and creepy shell of what it once was. Who do you think built the ancient city of Jado? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and while you're at it, be sure to subscribe. Crocodile Terrors of the Sahara. In 2019, archaeologists from the University of Jaén in Spain were performing excavations in Egypt, and amazingly, they found a tomb containing the remains of almost a dozen crocodile mummies. These crocodiles once prospered in the Nile River. In the days of the pharaohs, up until 2,000 years ago, the Nile was still a source of life and was rich in biodiversity. There were killer crocs and there were far more birds. And in general, life flourished in this part of the Sahara. It was a much different place than it is today. The ancient Egyptians had a fascination with crocodiles and would often sacrifice them to their crocodile god, Sobek. After the crocodiles were sacrificed with the instruction of a designated priest, their bodies would be meticulously preserved as mummies and deposited in their own tombs. This was a way to pay the utmost respect to Sobek. But here's where things get prehistoric. Crocodiles have been in Egypt since long before humans began worshipping them as gods. The Sahara has been home to crocodiles for many millions of years. A group of paleontologists recently found what they say could be the largest sea-dwelling crocodile known to science in the Tunisian desert, not far from Egypt. The prehistoric crocodile was over 30 feet in length and weighed an astounding 3 tons. The creature's skull was even the size of a human being, and so the researchers named the species Macamosaurus rex. One of the scientists involved in the study, Federico Fanti, said the crocodile was almost the size of a bus. Macamosaurus rex is only one example of the creepy creatures that once ruled the Sahara Desert. It's fitting that the Egyptians chose to worship the creatures so fervently since they have been such a large part of the ecosystem for so long. Prehistoric warfare. At the edge of the Sahara Desert in northern Sudan, archaeologists discovered human remains dating back 13,000 years. In 2014, a fresh analysis of the remains showed that the dead people were likely part of a primitive African war. The finding came as a bit of a shock, since it seems to be evidence of the oldest large-scale conflict in human history. The remains were originally found in 1964 in a prehistoric cemetery in Sudan, and they were dug out by American archaeologist Fred Wendorf. UNESCO is behind the funding for the excavations, and it was all a huge success. At the time, this was the oldest cemetery ever found in the Nile Valley. But then there came another discovery discovery in Kenya, with archaeologists stumbling upon the site of an ancient massacre near Lake Turkana. Human skeletons were found with their skulls crushed, and they had blades stuck in their bones. Researchers also found over 20 weapon fragments. This was labeled the earliest known warring hunter-gatherers in human history. But the find in Sudan was different because the dead were found in a graveyard, suggesting some sort of settled society. Sadly, further investigation revealed that 45% of the people in the cemetery died violently. Research done by John Moores University showed that the victims were from two different population groups. Some were from sub-Saharan Africa, while others were from North Africa. It's still not clear what happened here, but it looks like the first known violent clash between two different ethnic groups using weapons, such as spears and arrows. Stone Age skeletons. In Libya's Sahara Desert, archaeologists found a group of 20 skeletons from the Stone Age at an empty rock shelter. The bones proved to be a massive mystery because they span about 4,000 years. These 20 skeletons were buried here periodically between 8,000 years ago and 4,200 years ago. That's an extremely long time to use a single burial site, especially since it's filled with so few people. Archaeologist Mary Ann Tafuri from the University of Cambridge says it must have been a place of memory. This seemingly ordinary rock shelter was kept in the minds of the desert people who lived here for so many generations, it's almost unimaginable. It was used for 40 centuries, and yet only 15 people were buried inside the stone shelter. The other 5 were buried just outside under giant stones. The individuals that were buried inside were all women and children, while the 5 outside were men. It's all incredibly strange and seems to point to some form of ritual activity. There was most likely some strange belief system in place here, and maybe even a religion we know nothing about. But the dry and dusty bones weren't the only things found here. The archaeologists also uncovered huts nearby, complete with pots, dairy products, and animal bones. The rock shelter may have been a sacred burial place, but just outside was a primitive village. Ancient river monster. Morocco was once home to the largest predator that ever walked the planet. Recent fossil discoveries from the Sahara have revealed that a massive, creepy reptile once stalked the waterways of prehistoric Africa. The discovery came in the form of fossilized bones from a 95-million-year-old Spinosaurus tail. The unusual predator was a ferocious hunter in the Cretaceous period, weighing up to 7 tons and growing an estimated 50 feet. According to these measurements, it was bigger than the T-Rex and the ferocious Giganotosaurus. Its mouth was a pit of death, filled with teeth that could crush bone and destroy even the most armored dinosaurs. The Spinosaurus was a very bizarre creature. It was terrifying and ugly, and what made it even scarier is that it was absolutely massive. But it wasn't the only one prowling the Sahara 95 million years ago. Paleontologists believe southeastern Morocco was the most dangerous place on the planet during the Cretaceous period. The Spinosaurus lived here, and so did other apex predators like the Bahariasaurus and the Carcharodontosaurus, both of which could grow up to 40 feet long. Even crazier is that paleontologists have found very little evidence of herbivores living in this part of the world. Instead, the Sahara was populated almost entirely by carnivores. It was about as brutal as it could get here, since every living creature would have been trying to eat each other. It definitely wasn't a place you'd want to find yourself if you lived during the Cretaceous. The tomb of Queen Tin Hinan. In the mountainous region of Hogar in southern Algeria, in the sweeping sands of the Sahara Desert, a tomb was found in 1925. Archaeologist Byron Kounde Prorok was behind the monumental discovery. He breached the entrance of the tomb and found the amazingly preserved body of a woman, buried with a wealth of jewelry. This was just a few years after the discovery of Tutankhamun by Howard Carter, and everyone was fascinated with ancient Egypt. For that reason, the remains of this mystery woman went largely unannounced. Nobody seemed to care, and even today, the Tuareg queen Tin Hinan is hardly famous. Byron Kounde Prorok was one of the original tomb raiders, a real Indiana Jones type. He was fascinated with ancient ancient legends and scoured the Sahara Desert in search of treasure and myth. He came upon the location of the tomb by pure determination. After its discovery, he was told by the locals it belonged to Tin Hinan. Her name translates to "she of the tents," and it's believed she was the mightiest ruler of the Tuareg nation. There's almost nothing in the way of written records regarding this ancient desert queen. We hardly even know when she was alive, though it was sometime between the 3rd and 5th century AD. Her story has been passed down through the generations, and it's said that Tin Hinan united the Tuareg people. These people still exist today and have lived nomadic lives in the Sahara for centuries. She traveled through Algeria, Libya, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger with her entourage of servants, maids, and mighty troops. The nomadic kingdoms of Africa typically didn't live in a single city, and instead moved in large caravans. Then, when her time came to an end, Tin Hinan was buried in a tomb that scientists say may have started as a Roman fort when they invaded the Sahara in 19 BC. However, there is no proof that the tomb belongs to Tin Hinan or that she was a real historical person. For all scientists know, the tomb belonged to a different woman from high society in ancient Africa, but we should probably trust the word of the locals. What do you think?
The Tarxian Temples. The Tarxian Temple Complex is a shocking example of ancient ingenuity. It's the biggest prehistoric complex on the island of Malta and an official UNESCO World Heritage Site. The complex is made up of 4 distinct temples at the heart of the ancient village of Tarxian, located only a few hundred feet from the hypogeum. The complex was likely constructed between 3600 and 2500 BC. And while the temples here aren't the biggest or the most impressive from Malta's ancient past, the entirety of the site is something incredible. There are examples of prehistoric artwork everywhere. There were once statues erected throughout the complex. Most everything has been destroyed, but experts have still managed to piece the place's history together. It's believed the complex was used specifically for animal sacrifice. The prehistoric citizens of the island may have brought animals here and then sacrificed them on altars to feed their gods fresh blood. Archaeologists have found multiple altars, heaps of animal bones, and knives that may have been used in the killings. They even found some human remains at the South Temple. However, nobody knows if they were sacrifice victims or if the temple was briefly used as a burial pit in the Bronze Age. The Machu Picchu masterpiece. The ancient Inca sanctuary of Machu Picchu is a monument recognized by people all over the globe. But not everyone can appreciate the masterpiece of the sanctuary's construction. Even modern engineers consider it one of the greatest architectural achievements in human history. Machu Picchu was built on an extremely precarious ridge overlooking a river canyon. It was constructed in a seemingly inaccessible place, yet somehow managed to perfectly integrate with the landscape. The Inca built Machu Picchu as if it were an extension of the Andes Mountains. Menegat, a geologist from the Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul, believes the Inca built Machu Picchu intentionally at the site of where 2 tectonic faults meet. He says it isn't a coincidence that Machu Picchu is where it is. The Inca understood geology in a very advanced way. Rualdo believes they looked for a perfect place where tectonic faults clashed and where the substrate of the high mountains was fractured. The geologist backed up his claims using satellite imagery and field measurements. He created a map of intersecting fractures underneath the site, which show how the Inca built Machu Picchu in the best possible place. The Inca followed the matrix of fractures and faults in the mountain as they designed their neighborhoods. Everything from individual buildings to stairs were built out of the faults. This is how the stonework was so perfect. By using the network of faults and cracks, the Inca didn't just build a city, they molded their city out of the mountain itself. The Ziggurat of Ur. Some might say the Ziggurat of Ur is even more impressive than the Great Pyramid of Giza. It's much like an Egyptian pyramid, only built in Mesopotamia in 2100 BC. It is the largest and most well-preserved of all the Mesopotamian ziggurats. It is a pyramid but tiered with large terraces and step staircases. Researchers think making their pyramids tiered helped the Mesopotamians in the building process, whereas the Egyptians made their pyramids smooth. There are many ziggurats scattered throughout the deserts of Iraq and Iran, but the Ziggurat of Ur really is the most amazing example of the ancient technology. Excavations occurred in the 1920s. There was a joint project between universities in America and Britain to reveal the monument in its entirety. When it was originally complete, these ziggurats stood at least 100 feet tall. 3 gigantic staircases led to a gate blocking the first terrace. Then a single staircase rose to the second terrace. And at the very top of the structure was a temple. It would have been something to behold upon completion, with the head priest flailing his hands way up at the top of the temple. In total, the ziggurat required about 720,000 baked bricks just for its foundation. The sheer magnitude of resources needed to build all of it is staggering. The temple at the top was commissioned by King Runamo and dedicated to Nana, god of the moon. Unfortunately, none of the temples has survived into the modern age. Archaeologists have found some blue glazed bricks, which may have been part of the decoration. But that's only speculation. It's shoutout time! I want to give a big thank you to Dominic, Kalika, and Leanne for supporting this channel. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos like this. The Bada Valley Megaliths. On the Indonesian island of Sulawesi is a mysterious place called the Bada Valley, hidden away within the Lor Lindu National Park. The park is an official UNESCO World Heritage Site, both because of its wildlife and the crazy monoliths that cover the valley floor. There are over 400 granite megaliths here, their mystery forever unsolved. These statues can only be compared to those of Easter Island. That's the first thing that comes to mind when you look at these things. Many of them are partially buried, eaten by the grassy fields. Some are short, while others tower 12 feet above the ground. Researchers don't know who built the megaliths, only that some appear to be around 7,000 years old. They were constructed by a completely unknown society at a time when civilization had barely gotten started. These megaliths were first documented by outside explorers in 1908. The faces of the statues have human features very similar to the sculptures on Easter Island. But because the culture that made them is long gone, there is no one around to explain what they were used for. Were these effigies of gods? Were they created in the likeness of tribal chiefs? The questions here are truly endless. Another big mystery is that archaeologists have not found any human settlements in the area around where the megaliths are. It doesn't even look like anyone lived here to build the monuments. Do you have any theories on how and why these megaliths exist? The Kilmartin Glen Standing Stones. On the western coast of Scotland is Kilmartin Glen, a very special and very unique place. Human history here stretches back 5,000 years. There may have been people during the Ice Age, and likely primitive Neanderthals many more years before that. But modern human history started here 5,000 years ago. Kilmartin Glen is dotted with about 350 ancient monuments. Roughly half are prehistoric, and most are within a few miles of Kilmartin village. Ancient burial cairns, standing stones, and unexplainable rock engravings. Taken all at once, the Bronze Age monuments and Neolithic burial grounds form a ritual landscape of baffling proportions. Researchers don't know what was going on here, only that people buried the dead and participated in ceremonies. One of the most impressive stone circles here is in Temple Wood. At the center of the woodland is a fairly small stone circle. The stones are not particularly tall, barely coming up to your ankles. In the middle of the stone circle is an ancient burial plot. It's magical to see the place in real life and wonder who was so important that they were buried in the heart of a stone circle. A tribal chief, a god, person of magic? Nobody knows whose remains once graced the burial pit. The gigantic warship Tassara was one of the largest and most impressive vessels in human history. The gigantic ancient warship has nothing to deal with megaliths or mysterious sites, but its technological sophistication is worth learning about. Sometime around the 3rd century BC, the Greeks took their naval supremacy to a whole new level. They began to build floating fortresses. Tassara was a class of battleship not much smaller than a modern aircraft carrier. Legend has it the monstrous beast of a ship was the brainchild of Egypt's Ptolemy IV Philopator. Ptolemy IV was the descendant of Ptolemy I, Alexander the Great's general who took Egypt for himself after Alexander's death. The king of Egypt requested a catamaran galley of biblical proportions. According to ancient sources like Athenaeus and Plutarch, or Calixenus of Rhodes, the ship was so massive it was an ineffective war machine. It was a prestige vessel that may have taken 6,000 men just to operate. It would have had tall towers, defensive walls like a castle, and over 150 oarsmen at least. There is no physical proof that this behemoth of a ship ever existed, but scholars seem to think it may have been real. It would have been used as a mobile city to cruise easily across the Mediterranean Sea. It would have even had a small palace on it to accommodate the king, or whoever was in charge of the boat. It's unclear what may have happened to it, or even how long it remained floating. The Borobudur Temple. On the Southeast Asian island of Java is the unbelievably impressive Borobudur Temple. It is said to be the largest Buddhist monument anywhere in the world. Some even say it should be considered one of the 7 wonders of the world. It's not as ancient as the Egyptian pyramids, but it is roughly 1,200 years old. The temple was built around the 9th century AD on a grassy hilltop overlooking the beautiful jungles of Indonesia. Its architecture is distinctly Indian, yet also uniquely Indonesian. It blends traditional styles with the influence of medieval India. The massive temple is decorated in almost 2,700 relief panels. It boasts over 500 Buddha statues and might just be unbreakable. The stonework of the temple, built long before many of the Inca's most impressive structures, was completed without cement or mortar. The builders of the temple cut their blocks just like pieces of a puzzle. They fit together and interlocked without needing any sort of adhesives. Even after 1,000 years of neglect, the temple is almost undamaged. Borobudur Temple was only found by modern explorers of 1815, completely buried under the ash of an unknown volcanic eruption. Realizing its importance in the 1970s, the Indonesian government partnered with UNESCO to restore the temple. It took 8 years, and now the temple looks as if the last stone was laid just yesterday. If you could pick just one ancient place to be restored to its former glory, which would you choose? Let me know in the comments below, and hit subscribe while you're at it. The Obelisk of Aksum. Among the ruins of the ancient city of Aksum, once home to the mighty Aksumite Empire, there is one of the most impressive obelisks ever built. The Obelisk of Aksum was constructed about 1,700 years ago by King Izana. It's an exceedingly massive monument that weighs over 160 tons and stands 79 feet tall. The brief Italian occupation of Ethiopia saw many national treasures stolen by the European occupiers. In the 1930s, the monolith of Aksum was stolen from the Ethiopians. Italian soldiers found it in a partially submerged pit. It was dismantled, then taken to Rome as a spoil of war. That's where it stayed for almost a century. There were talks of returning it over the years, but it would be a monumental task. The Italians weren't very cooperative either. It wasn't until 2008 that they finally gave the great monolith back. Now it stands in the city of its creation once again. Seeing the obelisk with your own eyes is a remarkable experience. It's truly enormous, towering over the much smaller obelisks in the ancient city. It's covered in beautiful designs and strange decorations. The craftsmanship was far ahead of its time. The graphite used to build the obelisk was transported from a quarry many miles away, which required tedious organization from the Aksumites. The obelisk alone shows just how technologically advanced the empire was before it fell into ruin. The Knowth Passage Tomb. 5,000 years ago, a mysterious group of humans in Ireland constructed the Knowth Megalithic Passage Tomb, also known simply as the Great Mound. The enormous tomb is in the Bada Valley, surrounded by other, less impressive Neolithic constructions. The tomb consists of a single gigantic mound covering roughly a hectare of land. There are 2 passages that lead inside, each one leading to a different burial chamber. The eastern passage leads to what's known as a cruciform chamber. There are 3 recesses inside the chamber, and some carved basins where cremated human remains may have once been placed. The western passage ends in a rectangular chamber that may have also been used for burying cremated remains. The burial chambers are wildly impressive, seeing as how old they are, but the site is so much more than just mysterious burial plots. The mound is surrounded by 127 curbstones, most of them decorated in stunning works of megalithic art. There are over 200 decorated stones here, maybe even more than have yet to be found. Knowth is a truly remarkable place that scientists are still struggling to understand. Nobody knows who was buried here or why they deserved such a magnificent tomb. The archaeological site is also mostly off-limits. There is no direct public access, and the only way to visit is with a scheduled tour. Stone circles of Senegambia. In the Senegambia region of Gambia in Senegal, there are more megalithic complexes than any other part of the world. That sounds unbelievable, but it's true. There are 1,053 stone circles here and a total number of, get ready for it, 28,931 individual monoliths. This number includes individual carved stones found throughout various stone complexes and circles. It's absolutely crazy how many ancient monuments are scattered throughout this part of Africa. Not to mention the quality of the monuments. Experts say the stonework was done by an extremely sophisticated group of people. Many of these circles are also found near burial mounds, suggesting they were tied to complex religious rituals. But as with so much of the ancient world, nothing is truly known about these stone circles of Senegambia. Nobody knows what they were used for or why the ancients dedicated their lives to building countless monoliths. According to UNESCO World Heritage, analysis of the material shows the monoliths were built starting in the 3rd century BC. They continued to be erected up until the 16th century AD. Work went on here for almost 2,000 consecutive years. And yet now there is no trace of the people who did it or what their motives were.
The Red Giant of Kandahar. There is a rumor that the US government allegedly killed a 13-foot giant with red hair and then covered it up. This beast has become known as the Giant of Kandahar, a legendary creature who dwelled in the Rocky Mountains and hidden caves of the Afghan highlands. The bizarre event supposedly went down in 2002. It all started when an army squadron went missing and a special task force was sent into the region to discover their whereabouts. As the soldiers were moving along a ragged mountain trail searching for their comrades, they arrived at the entrance of a mysterious cave. It was at the mouth of the dark cave where they discovered military equipment and gear belonging to the lost squad. They were preparing to enter when a giant humanoid beast appeared from the rocks. It had long red hair like fire and 6 fingers on each hand. It was wearing animal hide like moccasin covers on its feet for protection and smelled like dead bodies. The giant wielded a primitive spear and hurled it at the group, impaling one of the members. But even the giant was no match for a group of skilled soldiers with M4 carbines. They unleashed fire for a full 30 seconds before it went down. Then the creature's body was reportedly airlifted back to base by helicopter, taken away by a team of men, and never seen again. The Department of Defense has no record of the incident. Most people believe it to be a hoax, and there is no way to prove whether a real red-haired giant really was living in secret up in the mountains. There is a high possibility the story could be nothing but an urban legend born during wartime. Ghosts in Vietnam. In the Vietnam War, one of the worst jobs was being a tunnel rat. Tunnel rats were troops ordered to crawl through North Vietnamese army tunnels hidden underneath the ground of the forest. These tunnels were often used as secret bases for the Viet Cong. Hundreds of soldiers could be hidden underground, and they could ambush American troops as they moved through the jungle. The only way into these awful tunnels was through sewer-like openings, and those openings were not easy to find. When one was discovered, tunnel rats had to crawl through suffocatingly claustrophobic passages down into the larger hideouts below, then eradicate the hostile forces within. The story you're about to hear is unconfirmed, told by a terminally ill Vietnam veteran who had allegedly kept it to himself his entire life. But on his deathbed, he published his story online so that he didn't have to take it with him to his grave. He and his partner were crawling through one of the deepest Viet Cong tunnels they had ever seen. They arrived at the bottom in the main chamber and were shocked to see that nobody was inside. There was a lit oil lamp, but no booby traps and no people, but the tunnel wasn't finished. Underneath the tarp, they found a set of stone stairs, which looked as though they were ancient. They had clearly not been built by the modern Vietnamese, but had been carved out of the earth centuries before. When the American soldiers got to the bottom of the staircase, they found a bunker with about 10 Vietnamese people sitting against the wall. They looked like zombies, with blank expressions as if they were all in a coma. The only thing in the room with them was a mysterious golden idol of a naked woman, with her lower half made of 8 tentacles instead of legs. It was all very confusing and horrifying, and in the end, the soldiers chose to destroy the tunnel. As they were leaving with the zombified Vietnamese, they allegedly heard the voice of a woman calling out to them from the room with the creepy idol. They used C4 to collapse the tunnel, and nobody has ever been able to explain what really happened. The Japanese Tengu. In Japanese folklore, the Tengu is a flying humanoid creature responsible for bringing storms, kidnapping people, and causing supernatural mischief. Following the end of World War II, a soldier named Private Sinclair Taylor was camped somewhere near Kyoto, Japan. It was late at night, and Sinclair had guard duty. He was watching the moonlight, everything was quiet and peaceful, and he stopped to light a cigarette. That was when he heard the loud gush of wings above him. He looked up at the dark sky and saw what can only be described as a flying monstrosity. It was bigger than any bird the private had ever seen. It descended from the moon itself, a creature with massive wings and the bodily features of a man. Sinclair fired his rifle at the beast, but as he did so, it simply vanished. His sergeant quickly rushed to his position and asked about the gunfire, and Sinclair was forced to tell him what he had seen. But his sergeant wasn't even that skeptical. He took the matter very seriously, suggesting that he too had seen something similar while stationed in Japan. He even searched the area looking for the creature, but nobody at the camp ever saw it again. The Moorbach Monster. The Moorbach Monster dates back to the 19th century in Germany. The first known sighting was in the Wittlich area in the 1810s. The creature has been described as a werewolf or a dogman, although nobody is really sure what it is. The creature supposedly began its life as a soldier named Thomas Schweitzer in Napoleon Bonaparte's army. He was stationed in Moscow in 1812 when the city was set ablaze and Napoleon's army was decimated by disease and starvation. Like many soldiers, Thomas deserted. On his way back to France, he joined a group of Russian deserters. They strolled into the village of Wittlich, where they raided a farmhouse and murdered the family. In her final moments, the farmer's wife put a curse on Thomas Schweitzer. She damned him to change into a monster on each full moon. And ever since then, a hairy beast has been seen prowling the forest of this rural German region. Some say the Moorbach monster is Thomas transformed. Some say it's just a large species of wolf. Do you believe in werewolves? Let us know in the comments below. Old Green Eyes. It was during the American Civil War that soldiers reportedly witnessed a ghoul that became known as Old Green Eyes. At the Battle of Chickamauga, which took place in September of 1863, on the border of Tennessee and Georgia, things were bloody and terrifying. It was the second bloodiest battle in the Civil War, second only to the Battle of Gettysburg. But while blood was being spilled on the battlefield, a ghoulish creature of malice and evil was coming out of its hiding place. Long before Europeans ever landed in the New World, this creature had allegedly been haunting the land. Tales of the creature have been told by Native Americans for centuries, although nobody really knows where the legend originated. Old Green Eyes is so ancient that its origins have been lost. Following the gruesome battle, the ghoul was allegedly seen pulling corpses off the field and carrying them away into the swampy woods. Multiple soldiers reported seeing a humanoid creature with bright green eyes, a deformed jaw, and massive fangs. The same creature has been witnessed multiple times since, especially in the 1970s. Some say there really is a ghoul living along the border. Others say the creature from Chickamauga was only a deformed person, someone who had already been living in isolation in the forest. The paranormal encounters of Afghanistan. A Marine who served in Afghanistan and Yemen from between 2009 and 2013 witnessed some strange paranormal activity while in the field. It was 1 o'clock in the morning, and the unnamed Marine had just finished setting up a patrol base. In front of the base was a large open field and an Afghan cemetery to the left. While the men in his squad slept, he stood at the front of the base and kept watch. While on guard, a rock came hurtling out of nowhere and landed at his feet. It seemed that someone out there in the darkness of the cemetery had thrown the stone. But he couldn't see anyone, and his vantage was wide open. There was no way someone could have been hiding, not even among the graves. After a second rock was thrown, the soldier put on his night vision equipment. Still, he couldn't pick up any infrared heat signatures. Then a third rock was thrown at him. There wasn't a single person out there and nothing but the bodies of the dead hiding underneath the dirt. And yet something, perhaps a spirit, was throwing rocks. The Marine never did get to the bottom of the mystery, and that night haunted him the rest of his time overseas. The White River Monster. The White River Monster is said to live near Newport in Arkansas. As far as the historical records show, the first sightings and reports of a strange creature in the White River came in 1912. That was when a group of timber workers spotted what they thought was a gigantic turtle downstream. It was so big that at first they thought it was a floating boulder, only to realize it was green and had what appeared to be a shell. Over the next 15 years, there were all kinds of stories about something strange living in the White River. In 1937, the story became national news. A farmer said he had witnessed an unbelievably large creature about 6 miles from Newport. The reports were so promising that the town was flooded with tourists trying to catch a glimpse of the mysterious beast. Moving on to the unofficial records, this very same creature was allegedly responsible for the sinking of a gunboat during the Civil War. While Old Green Eyes was pillaging bodies from the battlefield, the White River Monster was busy fighting boats. There are no official accounts of this, but rumors of the incident can be found in Arkansas to this very day. Bigfoot at Camp Pendleton. The Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization records, catalogs, and keeps track of every Bigfoot sighting that takes place in the United States. Report number 2907 was submitted on July 27, 2001. The witness was a soldier at Camp Pendleton, and he and 3 of his comrades allegedly confronted what they believed to be a Bigfoot monster during a nightly training exercise. According to those who made the report, the man and his team were in the hills near Camp Pendleton, the nearest town being Oceanside, California. They were at infantry training camp together and had dug into a large hill in anticipation of an enemy attack. As they waited, the 4 soldiers heard something coming up from the side of the mountain. They could hear rocks rolling down as something large moved across the unstable terrain. As soon as the beast came into view, the soldiers knew it was not part of their exercise. The creature was gigantic, standing in the dark and looming much larger than any man. The creature supposedly had long arms and a pointy skull. The soldiers didn't move at all. They watched the creature as it passed them by and held their breath until it was gone. Once it left, the 4 discussed what they had seen to make sure none of them were crazy. They had all seen the same beast, and they all agreed to keep it to themselves. But one of the witnesses felt like the story had to be told, and so he reached out to the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization to share his experience. The Rock Apes of Vietnam. Rock apes are the Vietnamese version of Bigfoot monsters. They aren't nearly as well known as the North American Bigfoot, but they are just as likely to be real. Or not. Up to you. The mysterious creatures were witnessed multiple times by American troops as they struggled through the jungles of Vietnam during the war. What really separates the rock apes from other strange creatures seen during wartime is the sheer number of witnesses. We don't know exactly how many soldiers saw the rock apes, but it was enough to make their existence at least plausible. Sure, not a single clear picture of one was ever taken. No corpse or piece of hair has ever been found, but still they are supposedly out there to this very day in the deepest jungles of Southeast Asia. American soldiers describe them as being about 6 feet tall, strong and sturdy, and covered in reddish hair. They supposedly live in small family groups, far away from human habitation. One explanation is that the American soldiers didn't see any monsters, but came across orangutans in the jungle. Orangutans are bigger than people. They are covered in reddish hair and once lived across Thailand, Vietnam, and China, so it would make sense. It's quite possible that the soldiers simply witnessed some of the last orangutans left in Vietnam. Dog-headed warfare. The Lombards were outnumbered by their neighbors in Germania. They were a wandering tribe that originated in Scandinavia and migrated south between roughly 376 and 476 AD. They went on to rule a huge portion of the Italian peninsula from 568 to 774. They did this even though they were very few and hardly able to defend themselves from their more aggressive and stronger neighbors. In the early days of Europe, tribal warfare was no laughing matter, but the Lombards prevailed using trickery and superstition to their advantage. It all started early on in their migration, when they came into conflict with their neighbors, the Accipiti. The Lombards resorted to psychological warfare. They spread rumors which traveled into the enemy camp that they had dog-headed creatures called cynocephali fighting for them. Cynocephali were legendary creatures who had the bodies of men, but the heads of dogs. They had already been around for hundreds of years, and plenty of tribes in Europe believed in these savage warriors. According to the ancient historian Paul the Deacon, the Lombards' trickery worked, and the Accipiti left them alone. The larger, more powerful tribe was too afraid they would be torn to shreds by human-dog hybrids that fought like demons. Would you be scared? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Remember to hit that subscribe button for more amazing history, and I'll see you next time. Bye!